All right, let's talk about coordination. Coordination is like one of the things that you have to figure out if you're a drummer. It's like one of these things that everybody wants to work on. It's the thing that everybody thinks is holding them back. And I love coordination. I love figuring out coordination. I love solving it. I think over the years it's been something I've actually cultivated. I'm pretty nerdy about it, and I think I have a way that's going to help you. So first, let's talk about how people usually think about coordination, okay? So when you first start learning about coordination, what most people will do is they use this word independence. Independence, right? It's this idea that like one hand does one thing and one hand does another thing. You know, like maybe I can keep my ride cymbal going and I can play like a Charleston rhythm on the snare. And then I can do them together freely, like they're moving independently. And then more importantly, it becomes like, can I keep this going and have this have a mind of its own? And then that becomes what people see as independence. But I think that in terms of like how our bodies work, that becomes, it's more of an illusion, really. These things aren't working independently, they're working what I call interdependently, right? And we hear them independently because there's different surfaces and different sounds. But our bodies, when we're learning coordination, it's important to think about them as how they work together. So let me explain what I mean. So when people learn independence, usually what they do is they get like a book, and I'm going to put this in a jazz context. They get a book, and maybe it's something like The Art of Bop Drumming by John Riley, great book. And you know, what they're doing is they say, okay, I have my ride cymbal pattern. You know, I'm just going to start that, my spang-a-lang. I'm going to start that, I'm going to keep that going, and then I'm just going to like add comp pattern number 1 on top of it. You know, something like this, right? Pardon my wrists. There we go. I'm just going to add that on top. Okay, cool. And then when I'm done with that one, you know, maybe I'll add comping pattern number 2. I'm just going to kind of add it on top. Okay? And I'll just do that, right? And so what happens is they get their cymbal going. Here we go. I'm going to do it. And it's like, it kind of jams in there, right? And what happens is it's kind of like these notes, instead of like lining up perfectly, they'll like, it'll be there, kind of. And so you'll play it like. This is when you're first starting, right? And so it's a little off, and so you just kind of repeat it, you kind of do it over and over again, and eventually, if you really, you know, muscle it through, eventually they'll line up perfectly. That process is, one, it takes forever, and a lot of drummers, when they're learning coordination, I'm using a simple example, but this applies to even the most complex things. Most drummers, when they're learning coordination, that is very frustrating because it feels like you don't have any control. You're like, I'm willing this thing to like line up right here, but it's not lining up for some reason. And no, I'll just try it again. 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 And it also becomes very disheartening. It feels like, oh man, I just can't do this thing. It's too tricky. I need to just make it happen, you know? And I would propose a different approach to all of this, okay? And, you know, it has to do with psychology. It has to do with how our brains are actually trained to do things, okay? And I'll tell you a little story that is going to kind of drive it home. One of my students was doing this today, okay? So what happened is that he was playing, you know, some sort of comp pattern like this, and he kept, every time he added a note, he would mess up the coordination for the notes before and all these things, right? So basically, here's what you got to do. Instead of like trying to take the whole ride cymbal pattern and then add on top of it these comp patterns or whatever you're playing, instead what we have to do is start with one note, right? So that's the first note. Like, let's imagine that we have our whole ride cymbal pattern again here. We know that we are going to play this eventually, and we want to play this on top of it, the Charleston rhythm. But instead of thinking like this, like these are two separate things, instead I want to put these two things together, okay? So instead I'm going to think of it like this. Here's my first note. And I played that exactly correctly because this is more how our brains work. Our brains think together, right? Okay, cool. And then let me write the next note. It's just this. Okay, great. Easy, right? And then now let me write my next note. This is where the second note of that Charleston rhythm comes in, right? I did like the 1 and the and a 2. You remember that? They lined up right there. Okay? So now I got this. Okay? Here's the thing. A lot of times when people play this, they'll go, they'll just do the coordination, but that's a rhythm. Those are 2 eighth notes. I got to play 1, 2, and it's important when you're doing this to do it in time. 1, 2, and, right? 1, 2, and. So my student got to this and he was doing actually very well. So far, so good, right? Once we got 3 notes. Okay, cool. Now the next note, if we go back up here, we can see that the next note is this little quarter note on B3, okay, on the ride cymbal. So I'm going to go back down here, and I'm just going to add that note. So this would sound like 1, 2, 3, okay, 1, 2, 3. So what he did is this. He went, wait a second. He got all the notes, but he changed this part. Why did that happen? That's really cool that it made an arrow like that. I've never seen that before. He changed this part, right? Why did that happen? Because before it was 1, 2, it was a quarter note and then 2 eighth notes, right? But then when he put in the next note, he made them all even. Why does that happen? Okay, what it should sound like is this, right? And then he went back and he's like, oh, okay, I got it. Oh, wait, hold on. Now it's all different. And it started to get mixed up like this. And this is where, you know, it really revealed something about how coordination works. And it has more to do with like our psychology and like behavioral science. Is why I love it. Okay? So check it out. It's kind of like my nephew, you know. I think he's 6 or 7 years old now. He just started going to school like last year, right? And when you're going to school for the first time, there's a lot of things you got to do, you know? It's like when he was, you know, 4 or 5, he started waking up at the same time every day, and his mom wanted to get him in a routine, okay? So first thing is he had to get up at the same time every day. That's his bed. Get out of bed, right? Okay, and he did that for like, you know, a month, and then he did that for 2 months, and then he got used to it. Some days he would get up at the wrong time. He would get up too late. Sometimes he'd get up too early, and then they finally figured it out. He got up at the right time. Okay, why am I telling you this? I'll show you. Don't worry, don't worry. It all makes sense. Okay, and then once he figured that out, then the next thing is he had to figure out like how to have breakfast and not have it take forever. Okay, so let me draw we'll draw some, I guess these are some eggs. I don't know. And he had to figure out how to have breakfast promptly. And because he's a kid, he used to just like, you know, go and have breakfast. He'd make a big old mess. His whole face would be messed up. He had jelly all over his face, and it would take so long that, you know, it didn't matter at the beginning because he wasn't going to school yet. But eventually he had to get it so that they could, you know, have breakfast. He wouldn't be so messy. And then, you know, he could get out of the door in time. It didn't take so long, right? So he had to get out of bed, and then he had to go have breakfast. Okay, cool. So he's got that. And then now he started going to school. And so every day he had to go to school. And, you know, like his first year, he's just in kindergarten. You just basically have to go, you know. And so maybe he had to get on, maybe there's a bus, you know. And he had to get on the bus every morning, okay? I'm an artist, right? Okay, so now he's got a little bit of a routine going. Every day he gets out of bed at the same time, okay? Gets out of bed, and then he goes straight to breakfast. And he knows how to have breakfast in like a short amount of time so it doesn't take up his whole morning so that he's ready. And the first couple times he went to the bus, he got there, a little early. Okay, they could wait a little bit. Oh, wait, and then there was a day that he was late. His mom had to drive him to school, right? Oh, and then he got used to like getting to the bus every time. He realized if I put my dishes in the dishwasher and then I just go straight to the bus, then I get there at 8:03 and the bus picks me up at 8:07, I'm good to go, right? He started to figure that out. Cool. Now he's doing really, really good with this. But then he starts to go maybe into the first grade and the second grade and the third grade and the fourth grade, and all of a sudden he starts having a test at school, right? And now he's got this test, okay? And so he goes to bed the night before the test, and he's thinking, I have a test tomorrow. I have to make sure I do really good on this test. He's thinking about, oh, I studied this, I studied that. He's doing spelling, whatever. He goes to bed, and he's thinking about the test, and he's got it all ready. He's ready, dialed in for the test. He's already thinking about it. So then in the morning, he's thinking about the test, and he's laying in his bed thinking about the test, and he gets out of bed at the wrong time. Uh-oh. And then he goes and has breakfast, and he's thinking about the test, and it takes him so long to eat breakfast that, you know, his shirt is stained. He has to go, he spills on his shirt. He has to go change his shirt. And then he misses the bus because that took him so much time, and he has to drive to school, and he missed his first period, and he doesn't even get to take the test. So he had to reschedule it, and he had to do it after that. But this test was not even possible because he messed up the earlier steps, right? So actually, here's the thing, and I'll show you how this ties into drumming. Don't worry, this long story. Here's the thing. In order to do good on the test, what he needed to do is to focus on getting out of bed in the morning, to focus on having a good breakfast, to focus on getting the bus at the time, and then he could think about taking the test. Which the test was the new thing that he added. He had been going out of bed, doing breakfast, getting on the bus for years, right? He felt comfortable with that, so he took it for granted, right? If he would have just done his normal day and then focused on the test when he got there, he probably would have aced it. You know, he had studied the night before. Okay, so what does this have to do with drumming, all right? This is exactly how coordination works, because our body learns things linearly, right? It doesn't learn things like this, where they're like two separate things and we can stack them on top of each other. Sometimes you can get away with this if you've built some coordination up to that point. So always try it. Sometimes you'll see that you'll get it, but it might not line up or it might be weird. The way that you fix it, you make sure it does line up, is by learning note by note. And you can't be, when you add a new note like this one, like my student did, the reason he got all the rest of the notes, like remember he was supposed to play them like this, like 1, 2, and, but then he just played them all even when he added the extra note. It's like, it's impossible to get the whole phrase right because they're all even, right? He was thinking about taking the test before he got out of bed in the morning, you know? And so really what would be better to do if you're trying to figure out coordination, like let's say that you can play these 3 notes really well, right? Like you get them right every single time. You got that. So that's like the equivalent of like getting out of bed, eating breakfast, and getting on the bus, right? Think about the test when you get there. Right? And this is how you solve coordination, is you play the chunk that you're playing right and get it to where you can play that whole chunk right, and then you add the next part. Do not add the next part until you play the other part. Don't focus on the end. The reason that you got the first chunk right is because you thought this, then that, right? You don't want to go this, then those, right? That changes the whole like domino effect. Our brains want to hear the same thing over and over again and then build upon it. It's like the cat jumped over, the cat jumped over the bush, the cat jumped over the bush, and then the cat jumped over the bush and then barfed, right? That's how practicing coordination should go. That's how you're going to build up muscle memory. And muscle memory makes it so that you don't have to think about it because your muscles think about it. Your brain doesn't have to cognate, and then that's how you get freed up. That's how you get more consistent and you can Also, like, it makes it so you can be in the moment when you're improvising and stuff like that because you're not having to think about your muscles. Okay? So really, what my student should have done, and this is what he did, this is what I helped him do, is that he was trying to do this. It was all uneven, or it was the wrong rhythm, right? So what he did instead is, hold on, back up, back up, back up. We got to go back to waking up on time. We got to go back to the first step. Okay, what's the first step? Great. Second step. Great. Third step. Great. And then he tried the fourth step, this note right here, adding it in, and then all of a sudden, ah, dang it, he messed it up. Okay, because he's thinking too much about this note. It takes too much of his brain power to get this note, and it takes away from the brain power that he needs for this because it's still kind of fresh. He doesn't have it internalized. So how do we solve that? Well, the best way, one of the best ways, is to create space between it. Because if I can play this correctly, then only play that note when I'm ready, then I'll probably nail it, right? So what does that look like? It looks like this. I'm going to play the first phrase exactly right, and then only play the next note when I have enough brain power to do it. Watch. What was that next note? Oh yeah. Right? So when you're practicing, it's going to look like this. Right? I went 1, 2, and 3. Not rhythmically accurate, but I'm putting that gap in there so that I have time to think. Now once I get that successfully, I got all the right notes in the right order. And the first part had the right rhythm. The only part that didn't have the right rhythm is the last part. It's better than like doing this and nothing has the right rhythm, right? So now I'm going to do that again. And I'm going to try to make the gap smaller like this. Okay, cool. It's a smaller gap. Now I'm going to try to make the gap even smaller. Ooh, that was pretty close, right? Now try to make it sound like it's supposed to sound. 1, 2, 3. Boom. You see what I mean? So it's like I did all the right things in the right order, and then doing it faster like that, doing it with the right rhythm, was just a matter of like repetition, you know? Because it's kind of like if you can say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, if you do that slowly, then it becomes easy to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Right? You don't learn that by going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? You learn it by like, you got so good at doing step by step by step by step slowly that fast is easy. That's how muscle memory works. It's like the way you play fast is that, this is like the brain part. It's like you have these little, you're building these brain connections, and the more you repeat it, the stronger those brain connections become, and then the easier it is for them to fire, and then that's why it's easy for you to play it faster with less thinking, okay? So if I was gonna like sum all this up and kind of give you some steps on how to practice coordination, okay? The first step, and I didn't talk about this so much, this might be another lesson, is that when you take something like this, you have to be able to kind of hear how it's going to sound. You have to be able to understand the rhythm, okay? So like, for example, I have to know that that's going to sound like 1, 2, 3, 4, Like I can sing the rhythm. I'm not going 1, 2, 3, 4, You know, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, I know what the rhythm sounds like, okay? So being able to just like sing the rhythm. We could do blue, that's fine. So be able to sing the whole thing, okay? And that's like the whole thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, cha, cha, right? Step 2 is play one note. Right? It's like one note. Great. Can we play the first note? Yes! That one's always a freebie because it's just one note. You have all the brain power in the world. Okay, cool. And then the next step is add next note. There's an important thing in here, in time. Okay? So for that example from before, it would be like, the thing was 1, 2, 3, 4, so I would go 1, 2. right? Okay? If you can do that, great, check, you did it. Now, if you can't add the next note in time, that's like you keep doing that. And here, let's, like, how should I write this? Add next note. And then you just basically like repeat this. You keep adding the next note in time over and over and over and over and over again, right? That's each note. So first note. Great. Second note. Third note. Okay, cool. Fourth note. Wait, oh no, I can't do that one in time. So if you run into a note that you're like, I can't do that one in time, then what you do, this will be like a little subsection, is gap, right? So the gap, the way that works is chunk 1, which is everything you know up to this point, in time. If you don't play it in time, it's going to mess up the muscle memory. We need the muscle memory of playing in time and adding the next note in time. That's the muscle memory we're trying to do. So you have to play the first chunk in time. This is what I did before. And then gap, and then next note. Okay, so what that looks like is this. Right? And how long should the gap be? The gap should be as long as it needs to be to play the correct next note. Okay? So if you try to go like this, you know, you play a wrong note or something, right? That gap wasn't long enough. The idea with the gap is that it gives you time to think, time to get the next note. Because the reason you're not getting the right next note is because your muscle memory isn't built up enough for you to think that fast. So you need to give yourself more time to think, okay? So it needs to be however long it needs to be to get the next note correct. If you do not get the next note correct, you did not do the gap correctly, and you have to do it again, okay? So what does that sound like? It sounds like this. Okay, what's the next note? It's a ride. And then you try to do it faster, right? It's however long it needs to be for you to get it right. So if you can get the next note right faster, then do it. Great. And then you keep doing that until the gap disappears. And then what do? You circle back up to step 3 and you add the next note in time, okay? So this probably sounds really simple, but you can learn any beat like this, you know? Like, you know, imagine you're doing Sissy Strut, right? So first note, great, second note, right? Third note, fourth note, right? Fifth note, sixth note, right? You get the idea. Now, I'm doing that and I already know all those notes, right? I've already learned that stuff, so it sounds really, really fast. To really get a good idea of this, maybe I'll post a video of me doing it with one of my students sometimes so you can see what this actually feels like. But, you know, you're gonna find that some notes are tricky, but this just zeroes in on exactly the coordination thing that's holding you back. Maybe it's, you know, for this example, it was the coordination thing that was holding him back was going from both hands to one hand by itself, an eighth note after, like a da-dum, right? That was the coordination thing. And when we added the gap and everything, it really highlighted that, and he got that under his belt. And then it fixed it. It fixes it as quickly as possible. Where when you're just trying to add things on top, it's very hard to like zoom in on the exact thing that's causing the problem. That's why this is so powerful. Now, here's the thing. This seems so obvious. Right? This is not complicated. This is not rocket science. It's kind of like, duh, Jameson, right? And you've probably done some version of this. Here's the thing. Most people do not practice like that. Most people won't do this. Why is that? Why is that? It's just like most things with drumming. It has a simple solution, but most people won't do it for an emotional reason, you know? So reason number 1, it takes a lot of patience, right? Because we want to just solve the puzzle. We want to just be able to play the whole thing. We know what it's supposed to be. We do have human brains that can understand like what I was talking about earlier of just like, slapping it all together like this, like, oh, it's this and that at the same time, right? We do understand that, but drumming is not just about understanding, it's about like muscle memory and getting it into your body. And so understanding it is not the only thing. You have to train your body to go through the motions and teach it muscle memory, okay? Most people don't have the patience to do that. It feels like it's taking a long time. They get frustrated, they run away, or they just whatever. They don't slow down. The other thing is that it takes humility. It's very humbling to play something one note at a time, right? And if you're a drummer who's been playing for years, maybe you have coordination when it comes to other things. Maybe you feel comfortable with the coordination of a rock beat. And you have all of those things dialed in actually, and you have a ton of coordination with your bass drum. But if you were playing a jazz beat, you wouldn't know where to start, right? And so it's very humbling to like, oh man, I can play the rock coordination really well, but when I go to play the jazz beat, I feel like I'm starting from square one, right? I've taught a lot of drummers, all different skill levels, right? And the people who are the most humble, they get this and they realize it's the fastest way to get better, and they just take off. They get better so fast because they're not afraid to just like slow down and do this, right? So if you can have the patience to do that and the humility to just be like, yeah, I have to go note by note, even though maybe I have gigs, even though maybe I've been playing for years, even though, I'm comfortable with other styles. Like, yeah, I'll go note by note because I know it's the fastest way to train my muscle memory, because that's how psychology works. So I hope that serves you. I hope you can apply it to the next time that you have some coordination problems, and have fun.